Hello and welcome to History Slices podcast. This is Rachel.
And this is Jacob.
This is our 11th episode of the podcast. Wow. And in this podcast, we talk about things that are fun, little bits and pieces of history that sometimes don't get discussed very much and sometimes are lesser known. So Jacob gets to pick the topics. And today, all I know about today's topic is that it is a Christmas special. Jacob.
Yeah, I thought it would be fun to... because it's the holidays now, you know, and by the time this drops, it'll be like within a week of Christmas. I'm not sure if it's going to be before or
I think between Christmas and New Year, so people will hopefully still be in the holiday spirit.
Yeah, I would expect so.
I would hope so. They've returned all the gifts they didn't want.
Yeah, threw out all the Christmas trees. Yeah, but I thought this would be a good time to just kind of break from the norm and be like, hey, why don't we do like a festive, fun thing?
I think that sounds great. That week between Christmas and New Year, actually starting with Christmas Eve, is probably one of my favorite times of year. Very relaxing. Anyway, so
you could probably guess what it's going to be about because there's only so many iconography or so many like things associated with Christmas. But why don't you guess? You know, like, do you have any ideas?
Yeah,
what we're talking about?
my guess, because Christmas it would be something about Jesus.
Not directly, no.
Okay,
but good guess.
So something about, let's see, knowing you, it has something to do with analyzing.
It's not Star Wars.
Actually, I wasn't even going to go there.
Okay,
but I was going to say analyzing
that.
Like Christmas in today's pop culture, something like that.
That would be interesting. Put a pin in that. But no, I was going to come out and say I want to talk about Santa.
So let's hear it. What you got?
Right. So first of all, just to kind of give a brief overview before we dive in, this is fun because I learned some things myself.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. When I was researching this, I was like, what are his origins? Like, why is this a thing? And I found out there's several sources or several things that evolved from. Basically, I want to talk about kind of like the initial origins, or at least in terms of Western culture. I'm going to talk about how that evolved over time and who like influenced our popular conception of this man.
Cool.
Yeah, then I'm going to briefly, because there's a lot, and I don't want to like just go through like a long list, but I want to go briefly through like some other versions of him, because a lot of cultures, especially in Europe, there's so many different Santas.
Yeah, I've heard a few, so I'm interested to see what else I can learn from you and remind me of some of those fun, there's some really fun traditions I've heard about.
Well, let's talk about the one and only St. Nicholas. Have you ever heard of him?
St. Nicholas, yeah.
Yeah. He was from, nowadays as part of Turkey. I don't know, like,
I couldn't have told you that. I wouldn't have known where he was from like that. That's cool.
Like near Greece or wherever.
Yeah.
But basically, he is a Catholic saint. He lived 270 to 343. So like pretty early on in like AD times, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like first millennium, like a couple centuries after Jesus.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Something that comes immediately apparent when you're researching saints, they are patrons, thank you, of so many stuff, like a ridiculous amount. Like a lot of them have like a list of 20 some things that they're a patron of.
Wow.
And St. Nicholas is no exception. We briefly kind of mentioned a similar
with the dancing plague.
What was his name? Vitus, whatever. But yeah, to list some of this stuff, there's more, but some of the stuff St. Nicholas is like associated with: the country's Rus and Greece, first of all, just straight up, archers, pharmacists, unmarried people, it seems oddly specific, children, sailors and fishermen, and like a whole bunch of cities like that's just sprinkled around Europe.
Gosh. I wonder how they made sure that
there
were enough saints, like every city was covered by a saint. You know?
Yeah, I don't know what determines this. I don't know who decides.
He's over countries and cities.
Yeah.
So yeah, there must be some hierarchy.
I don't know. It might just be like whichever pope like canonizes them and they're like, they're saints of this. I don't know.
Yeah, so interesting. So that's a whole nother topic.
A whole nother topic.
Yeah, so St. Nicholas, not just about Christmas, but about all this stuff.
What the legend goes, and this is one of those things that, because it happened so long ago, the factual truth of it is kind of like, well, we don't really know exactly what happened. But the legend goes that he secretly gave gifts to children. Secretly, we know it was him. But he gave gifts to children, which inspired the story of Sinterklaas, which is like the Dutch name. And it got, or Germanic name, whatever. And it got, when the Dutch brought that story of Sinterklaas over to America when they were one of the people who settled, in like New Amsterdam, which later became New York City, obviously. But like that got kind of Americanized or Englishized or whatever you want to call it into Santa Claus. So there you go.
So it went from sorry, I don't mean to complicate things. I'm just thinking about there's a lot of time between when St. Nicholas was there. And so you're just basically, you're not giving me the whole evolution of it, just how it got to the U.S.
Yeah, well, I'm going to get into that more. But basically, there's a lot of different figures in different countries and different like cultures that are basically the same thing. Figure going around the holidays or that season, giving gifts, rewarding good children, punishing bad children, basically. And in some cases more extreme than others.
Wow.
But it probably started, or at least, I mean, there was there's some kind of paganistic like origins, or at least some people have put forth theories that like, well, that's kind of similar to Odin or whatever, just in terms of like the look and the attitude or whatever.
Interesting.
But yeah, but like the specific giving out gifts to children and stuff probably comes from St. Nicholas, and eventually became Santa Claus because of like the American version of or English, I should say, because America's not the only country that uses that name. In fact, nowadays, a lot of those European countries have more of a recognizable Santa Claus figure that's kind of overtaken or merged with the whatever was there before, like the kind of.
And when you say recognizable, you mean to Americans?
To America,
okay.
Red outfit, long white beard, that type of thing. So, and this is interesting to me because Santa still doesn't like resemble the Santa we know. There's still like a lot of elements that got added in later. And one of those people, there was a writer and professor that was in like the early 1800s. He was actually born like 1779, but he lived, I think, mainly in the 1800s. And his name was Clement Clark Moore. He was from New York, funny enough. But he was a professor of Oriental and Greek literature and was pretty
That's interesting.
I know it's a weird mix. He was pretty well off in terms of money, maybe just because his job paid well or whatever. But he's credited, and there's some debate about this, but he's credited with writing the first version of "Twas the Night Before Christmas."
Oh, interesting.
Which he actually had a different name for it. It was a visit from St. Nicholas. There's a couple names for it. It's the poem that later got set to music, and that's where the whole like flying reindeer comes down the chimney. Yeah. That kind of.
I wonder did he create those ideas that are in that song, or was that part of like the culture and the quote unquote legend at the time of Santa?
Well, this is like the earliest kind of thing that references that stuff in terms of Santa. If there's something before, which is totally possible, we're not sure.
Yeah,
we don't
that's
know.
Really fascinating.
And there's also like debate as to like, because it was a poem originally, it wasn't a song. Yeah. But there's debate as to like he might have wrote it, another guy might have wrote it, but he's generally credited and accepted as the guy who wrote it. Not that I think it necessarily matters too much, but it is interesting. The second person that kind of helped influenced our view of him, same century, but a bit later, because he was born in 1840. His name is Thomas Nast, N-A-S-T, not N-A-S-H. He was a German-American political cartoonist. It's just interesting.
Yeah, really.
First of all, I'm going to tell you kind of what he's known for, because he's definitely seen this guy's influence and not known it. The elephant symbol for Republican Party, that was him.
Wow.
He didn't make these, but he popularized them. Like they predate him, but he used them a lot and made them more popular. The Uncle Sam.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, the Democrat Party's donkey.
Wow.
And Columbia, like the American symbol. Wow. That one's kind of defunct now. We don't really use that one as much.
Except I still see it in the beginning of movies.
That's true. Yeah. There is that. Yeah. And like, I think I could be wrong. But I think the Statue of Liberty might also have been modeled after that, but I could be wrong. That could be a different thing entirely. That's shaky ground there. There's resemblance, but don't quote me on that.
Oh, that's really fascinating. What was his first name?
Thomas.
Thomas Nast.
But the reason I'm bringing him up is because he created our image of Santa, the jolly fat man in the red outfit. That image was his creation.
Trying to remember the lyrics of those songs in that poem. Yeah. Right now to see what description of Saint Nick was in that, because there was some description of him. Yeah. And I'm thinking maybe Thomas Nast just like made the visual or expounded on that.
Very possible, but keep in mind not to shoot down what you're saying, but just to be devil's advocate here. There's several versions of that poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas."
Yeah.
So I haven't read the original. I don't know. I know like what it is because it's like, I think it's pretty much what you think it is.
I'm actually thinking too, not to deviate too much, but I'm thinking of a poem, and I'm also thinking of a song, but it's a little different. Like there's the poem that starts out, "'Twas the night before Christmas and all through the house." And then there's a song I'm thinking, "Up on the housetop." Is that the song that goes with, is that the one you're talking?
I don't know, honestly, but that's like a good point. There is a difference there.
But they seem to be kind of similar. I'd have to look at the
like
lyrics.
They're like the same story or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't know who wrote the "Up on a Housetop," clip, clip, clip.
Yeah.
After Jimmy comes singing. I don't know who wrote that.
But both the song and the poem, whatever's existing at the time, there is some description of Saint Nick in there. So he could have just fleshed out, visually what Saint Nick looked like. So anyway, curious.
Yeah.
So he is credited with coming up with that jolly old fella we all love.
Yeah, well, in part, like it was St. Nicholas, Clement Clark Moore, and Thomas Nast that like those three people arguably are responsible for Santa as like a thing,
an icon,
of mythology. I don't know what you call it, but yeah. And like I mentioned earlier that there is a lot of different versions in Europe. I want to just touch upon some of them briefly, and then we'll get into, in my opinion, the funnest part of this.
Is it the presents? Just kidding.
No, well, yes, but no. Yeah. It's people who have problems with Santa.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Well, let's hear about what's going on in Europe.
Sure. So first of all, something that got kind of lost across the pond, so to speak, is that certain countries in Europe have like a Santa. In America, he gives presents to good kids, cold to bad kids, or whatever. Yeah. Which I think that's still a pretty decent present. It could heat up your house, but whatever. That's just me. Maybe nowadays, but yeah, but the punishments in some like Scandinavia or whatever, way harsher, and they're not all done by the Santa figure, but they have is a figure named Krampus.
I've heard of that before.
Yes,
yeah.
And for a long time, I think he wasn't really known in America. But a couple years ago, 2015, I believe, there was a comedy horror movie called Krampus. And I think that kind of introduced a lot of people to like, oh, that's a thing. Interesting. Yeah. Basically, Krampus is this loser of a demon. I say that because he gets like, basically, he's like Santa's minion or whatever. Some stories has him, he's like enslaved or whatever, but he's basically this like, it's like goat dude who goes around like kidnaps kids or like hits them sticks or whatever, basically like the bad cop to Santa's good cop. Yeah. A lot of like, again, Scandinavia, a lot of Germanic countries kind of have this figure. Italy has its own version. I'm going to make an attempt to pronounce it because it's Italian. Badalisc, something like that. Badalisc. I don't know how you pronounce that. Basically, it's like a lot weirder looking. I don't know how to. It's not like a person. It's like an animal thing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but it's basically It's basically like the same.
That seems so scary, doesn't it?
It does, and I know because you can find pictures of like in some of these countries they'll have Krampus night. And it's basically just a bunch of hooligans dressed up as like Krampus going around scaring tourists and stuff. This is kind of funny, but it's also one of those things where like it kind of invites
mischief.
Yeah, and less than ethical behavior from what I heard. So some countries are being kind of like, maybe not, maybe kind of clamp down on that.
Yeah, interesting.
But that's like a thing that they like part of the holidays is they'll have, like just like a day or a night where like people dressed as like goat demons will wander around.
That's kind of crazy. Reminds me a little bit of Halloween.
A little, yeah. I mean, it's like a Night Before Christmas or something, kind of just mixing the two. But other countries, like I said, have different versions. I'm going to make an attempt to pronounce some of these. And I only have a couple here because there's so many. I don't want to get too into the weeds, but I'll kind of try to highlight the differences between them and our Santa.
Okay.
So there's an Iranian version named Amun Nomraz, Nowruz. He's more associated with New Year's than Christmas, but is still pretty similar. He's an old guy with a beard, gives gifts to children, but it's like kind of like a different holiday.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense.
That does.
That it would be in, Yeah.
There's another one from Italy named Befana. Befana. And the difference is instead of an old man, she's an old woman.
That sounds a little bit familiar to me, actually.
Oh, does it? Okay.
It's specifically around Christmas time?
I believe so, around the holidays at least. That season, which I kind of touched on this before, but like even before like Christianity really took roots, there were Yule time celebrations and like more paganistic cultures. So it's like that time of the year has always been like people celebrating or people having like ceremonies or whatever you want to call it. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because like
there's
the weather.
I always get these two mixed up, but the solstice and the equinox. I think there's an equinox in December,
those mixed up
like
too.
around the 21st or something.
Something
so
like that.
Every quarter there's something that goes on.
Yeah. And I've said this before. I don't know if I've said it on the show, but I've said before where like a lot of early Christian like missions and priests and stuff, when they'd go out to like try to spread the good word, they were encouraged to take on some of the customs and festivals of the people that they'd go to in order to like kind of be more accepted, I guess, and kind of how the people be more open to like their preaching. So like Easter, it's celebrating the resurrection, but there's still elements where it's like the chocolate rabbits and the eggs and stuff like that. That's from like, I can't remember what.
And that's really the secular celebration of Easter.
Yeah, sure. But I'm trying to remember like where, like what exactly it came from. But it was like a fertility pagan thing.
And because it's spring, because spring, that's when everything is, being
born and
all the flowers are
But so, it's like there's kind of elements that have like carried over, but
a little mix.
Honestly, and I don't mean to be on my soapbox, but I don't think it matters too much. Like if you're celebrating it for one reason, it's that reason you're celebrating it for. And if there has to be like, some pagan elements or elements that originated in like a different faith, who cares? You're still celebrating for the
if you don't know the history of it and you're just celebrating because it's a thing that you do in your culture, then that's something else too.
Yeah. But it's interesting to me to look back on like history and see these things. So there's some more versions, just real quick. There's a Belsnickel, I think is how you call it. This is a silly name, but it's basically a German version. It's combining both Santa and Krampus together. Oh, so it's a bit of a I'm not sure how that looks, but it's
that's interesting.
Instead of having two figures, it's kind of one figure.
Yeah, I haven't heard that before.
There's the name translates as Grandfather Frost, but it's Din Moros. I don't know. It's a Russian version. The Soviet Union banned that one because they're like, that's too non-secular for us. Because the Soviet Union was very much like state atheism or whatever. Like that was kind of their policy. So
how curious.
Yeah.
Grandfather Frost.
Yeah, which is like the Russian version. Of course, the Russian version would translate into Grandfather Frost. Yeah. Because they're
cold.
They're hardy people. I'd say. There's a Finnish one as well. I'm going to make an attempt. I say that a lot, but this is like such a long name.
Oh yeah. It's like some Welsh words like
Joulupukki.
Okay.
Joulupukki.
Wow. Sounds like you did pretty good.
There you go. So it used to be kind of his own thing, like kind of more distinctive, but in more recent times, that's kind of become more of a Santa clone. Like how, guy in a red with beard. I mentioned it earlier. Yeah. Just because of globalization, I guess, and have American culture just spraying out all over the place. Because that's one thing, again, not to get too geopolitical when talking about Santa Claus, but a lot of people in Europe and Asia to an extent, they get a lot of American culture because a lot of like popular movies and stuff come out of America. So a lot of misconceptions or a lot of ideas of what American life is like more akin to what California life is, because that's, you know what I mean, because that's like where a lot of movies are made.
What the movies
yeah. So it's like, it's interesting, but it does kind of lead to, and some people have argued if this is good or bad or whatever, there's this thing called globalization where like some cultures kind of getting subsumed or kind of messed with because of influence from other cultures. And I mean,
that's a whole nother study.
That's a whole other thing, and that was going to happen anyways, honestly. But
it's a matter of time.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Anyways, last one. Sorry, keep getting sidetracked.
Well, you're talking about the whole globe and history.
Well, it's just interesting. I get off on rambling.
Everything's connected. So
it is. Nothing exists in a vacuum. I always say that. Mikulas? Kalas? It's a Hungarian version of St. Nicholas. He's also not unique to Hungary. There's a couple other countries in that area that kind of have this figure, this name, including Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia, Croatia, and the Czech Republic. Okay, you know, that area, like mid-Eastern Europe. I've heard differing definitions of Eastern Europe.
Yeah. And it's a place that's changed a bit.
Yeah.
So what's their guy like?
I think he's just more like St. Nicholas, more so than Santa Claus, I think.
Okay.
Like a lot of them are pretty similar, which is one of the reasons why I didn't like go make a giant list about it.
Yeah.
But also it was just interesting to me to be like, oh, but you can see there are differences. There are like kind of a their own take on it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm thinking we had a tree topper, or maybe we still have it, that was an old guy with like these capes, and he had, you know, gray hair, and I think he had a staff or something.
Yeah.
It definitely does not look like Santa Claus. To me, that's more like what Saint Nick would look like.
Yeah,
and then,
it probably was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also been a lot of, I've seen old drawings from like 2 centuries ago where like he's in green, not red. There's a lot of him in green, which I guess is like
It makes a little bit more sense to me, honestly, being green. It's a more natural color than red.
Yeah, I suppose so. But it's
bright red.
Yeah.
Shiny
Well, yeah, if it's
black
bright red, yeah. It's like that plastic, like looking like neon red.
Plastic Santa.
Yeah. There's a lot of different like looks to Santa, more so than you'd think. And if you really like look into it, you're like, oh wow, yeah, there's a lot of different
ways he looks, but primarily what they have in common is that he brings gifts for children.
Yes, and sometimes punishes bad kids.
And punishes them.
Or if it's not him.
Or actually it's just the threat of punishment, really, because I don't know that anybody really gets coal or kidnapped.
Yeah, no, it's the threat. It's the like, you know, eat your vegetables or the boogeyman will get you.
Yeah.
You know, it's the keep kids in line story. So no, you're good.
I was going to talk about the elf on the shelf, but that's really getting over there. I think it's another way to keep kids in line, but probably. I never played that game, so I don't know.
Okay, that's a little bit before my time.
Yeah. No, it's current. It's going on now.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Well, so is what I know then.
That's because we didn't.
Would you like to host a show?
Sorry.
No,
I think just to finish that up, I think it's actually something that started maybe because of a book, and it was the book I think came out. I wasn't aware of it when you guys were kids, or maybe we would have done it. I don't know. Anyways, go ahead.
Sorry. No, you're good. You're good.
Carry on.
So this is like kind of the to wrap up, because I thought this is really interesting, and it's curious to see all these different peoples and cultures and countries have their version. But I know there's people who don't like this, and so I looked it up.
Who don't like Santa, period.
Yeah, and sometimes it ties in with also not liking Christmas, but sometimes it's just Santa. And
probably for different reasons.
Oh yeah, people you would think would disagree on everything else sometimes agree on this. And it's like for all sorts of reasons. I want to get in because I have like another kind of like laid it out basically. So there are some religious sexes, like to meaningful word, groups, let's say, who are not fond of this particular holiday, the Calvinists and the Puritans specifically.
Now, are there still Calvinists and Puritan, like specifically called those things?
I don't.
Or that was like maybe back.
I don't think they're necessarily called that anymore. Yeah. But yeah, the
I guess let me rephrase my question.
Sure.
Are you talking about a time past when they didn't like it?
I'm just talking about in general.
Okay.
So contemporary and like back in the day in history. So these two groups in particular, St. Nicholas was a saint, obviously. So there's some Catholic origins to it. And these two groups are like, well, we're not really Catholic. You know, we're more on like on the Protestant side, or at least Calvinists, I think we're more on Protestant side. And the Puritans are like further on down the line, you know, evolution, splinter group of that. Religion is complex. But basically they thought, well, that doesn't really align with our faith. Also, another kind of religious group, if you will, Non-Conformist Christians, which is a phrase you don't really hear much in this country. In the UK, it's more of a thing where basically people who like have that faith but don't really like, from my understanding, I kind of just skimmed the article, but from my understanding, they kind of don't really like follow all the rules or
Non-Conformist Christians,
dogma, or whatever you want to call it.
That's an interesting
term.
And
but anyways, they from what I've heard, some of those people, you know what I mean? People who fall under that banner have problems with how materialistic and commercially driven that the holidays become, which again has been a theme for like decades. So
yeah, I can see that.
Then on the opposite end of the coin, atheists, like specifically, because some don't care, you know, some are like, oh, that's fun. It's a fun holiday. But I mean, in terms of state sponsored atheism, like the Soviet Union and China's kind of been like this a little bit too, but Soviet Union banned Christmas as well as other holidays of like a more religious nature. And much more recently in 2018, the Chinese city Lanfan, the Chinese city with that name, Lanzfanz. It looks like Lanfan. I don't think that's how it's pronounced.
Okay.
Anyways, they released a statement prohibiting selling Christmas items, including Santa Claus figures, or else you'd be like, I don't know, like fined or something.
2018. Wow.
Yeah, so they also have a bit of a problem with it. I don't know what it is with certain countries of a certain ideology, let's say.
It might just be about control.
Maybe that have a problem with like religion, but I know North Korea is also like really anti-religion, or at least in terms of as far as the authorities are concerned. So I don't know what's up with that, but it's
thankful I don't live in any of those places.
Yeah. So a lot of people also, just in general, have a problem with how commercial it's become. I've mentioned this a couple times. It's like that in America. It's like that in Europe. There's like tons of like merchandise. There's tons of things that's
it's kind of funny because I totally interrupted you.
No, you're good.
But we play along with it. Like, it's commercialized because we buy things. We like to decorate. We like to give, you know, we like to, and then there's all these not new, but social norms that go along with it. You know, you bring a gift to whoever, you get a gift for whoever. So there's a lot of,
there's a lot of products that only go on sale around the holidays.
That's true too.
You know, like there are whole, like, there's like a whole, I don't want to say industry, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that's like specifically Christmas stuff or Thanksgiving stuff or Halloween stuff, whatever, the November
we
through
can make
December.
Some money with.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like there's like cards and there's like a lot of things that's just like a lot of money changes hands, let's say, which is kind of how it is. But
it is. I wouldn't have it any other way though. It just makes it a personal decision if you want to participate in that or not. You know?
Personally, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. It is telling. Like, to give an example, in Ohio, it's illegal to sell or to use the image of Santa to sell alcohol.
That's very interesting.
I don't know how that came about. I assume maybe it's like they're
trying to protect his image.
I guess, yeah. But it's interesting though that like I can't remember, Bud Light or something, some company that sells beer got into trouble when they like tried to, because their mascot's like a dog or whatever, and they had him in like a Santa hat or whatever, you know, like back in like the 80s as like a kind of holiday thing. Yeah. And Ohio was like, no, you can't do that.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Wow. So it's just I don't know if that like means they're for commercialization of the holidays or against it or what, but it is, I think, probably really related.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
That would have been interesting to be a lawyer on that case.
So the arguably like one of the bigger ones, and this is less from a social money perspective and more of a psychological, is this ethical perspective, lying to children about Santa, where you know darn well Santa isn't real. It was kind of a unique perspective from you know my perspective, I guess, because you guys never really kept up that charade because there's just so many of us. You kind of, I think, is how it was.
Well, I think when it came down to that moment, that it was like one of you asked me in the car if Santa was real, and and you guys were way younger than I thought I would ever be facing that question, and you know there's a range of ages too in the car. So it was like, I had a split second to think, is this the moment I'm going to be honest, or am I going to, you know, play along? So I kind of fumbled a little bit, but in the end, I didn't want to face the letdown or the feeling like it would erode trust. You know, I wanted my children to trust me when I say things. So just at my core, I couldn't do that, but I wanted to play along because it's fun. You know, who doesn't like Santa? Yeah. So I tried to strike a balance somewhere in the middle where you guys knew that he wasn't really the one coming to bring you gifts, and I still expect you to behave. You know, but not I didn't want to put the trust of our relationship in jeopardy, and that it was just a personal decision that we made, instantly. But for a kid who never really believed, I mean, you being the oldest, you must have believed.
I can't remember if I believed in Santa. I know at one point I did believe in a tooth fairy, but that was like, that also doesn't really hold up logically, because the reason I believed that is because I put a tooth on my bed. And I woke up next morning and there was like a penny in like a plastic Ziploc bag. And I'm like, the tooth fairy. But I was like, oh, why would the tooth, one, what a cheapskate, a penny. Two, why would a tooth fairy use a Ziploc plastic bag? So
very interesting.
I remember that happening, but like, I don't know if I ever really believed in Santa. If I did, I was very young and don't remember it. But it was interesting, like, because a lot of households do kind of carry on that, like, Baby, hey, Santa's here. So in terms of holiday controversies, this is an interesting sentence. This is like a big hot button one amongst a lot of people.
You mean the one that we just said, or the one you're about to say?
I mean, the one that we just said.
Yeah, and that one, if I could just go, I want to just interrupt again. But
no, interrupt.
Just talking about it being a controversy and whether or not parents want them to believe it. I just explained why you guys didn't once I was faced with that question.
Yeah.
But another interesting thing to me, and I'm sure people are different and make their decisions. So this is not to disparage anybody's, how they deal with it in their own family.
Sure.
But I wanted to have all the control over you guys, basically, where, if you don't behave, there's going to be consequences, but not if you don't behave, Santa's watching. And he's, it's like, well, Santa doesn't really have any authority in the household. So who are you really listening to? So I didn't want to have, just that always bothered me. Or same with, when your dad gets home or whatever, it's like, okay, but
what's he going to do?
Yeah, right now.
By the time I count to 5, you better be back. And what happens when you get to 5? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. That's a whole nother parenting thing. I mean, it is related to Christmas because we're talking about, you better be good or you're going to get a box of coal, for Christmas. But that's just a whole parenting thing that you come across so many things when you begin parenting that you're like, whoa, I never thought about this.
How do you do this?
And then you're the best parent ever before you ever have children. And then you have kids and you're like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. But I actually, before I let you go on real quick,
I
was going to say that one Christmas, I actually did get a bag of rocks. And I thought that I had deserved a bag of rocks. And it turns out it was just rocks because I also got a rock tumbler that year to shine rocks. But the first thing I got was literally a paper bag, like a lunch bag full of some rocks.
You think they would put those together or something?
It was a strange Christmas. I don't want to go into too much of it, but that was really a funny thing to look back on. I thought for sure I must have messed up.
It's like, oh no.
This is what it comes to.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, but like, first of all, people who are like in favor of it, very understandable, because it's like it's appeal to tradition. It's like, well, it was like this when I was a kid or whatever, and I turned out fine.
And there's a lot that's associated with it. There's a lot of joy. There's a lot of family time. People take vacations.
There's that childhood magic.
There's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, and I'm like, sure, man, totally. But there's also a lot of good points the opposition raises as to like, maybe we shouldn't do this. First of all, for both people who are religious and people who aren't, they kind of have issues with it, which is interesting to me. Like for atheists or agnostics or people who aren't really into that, there's the breach of the usual line is bad kind of ethical thing, where it's like 99% of the time you shouldn't lie, right? But this one time you can lie to like someone who trusts you impeccably, and that kind of doesn't jive for some people. Also, there's a fear of like, this might mess with their development for critical thought, or like, how because they're still like, their brains are still developing, they're still like figuring things out. I mean, everyone figures, you never stop that, but in terms of like child
we really know how to overthink things, don't we?
But in terms of child development, it's like one of those things where it's like, well, I don't want them to like start questioning like real stuff later. That's like,
I can see how that could be a potential concern.
For religious people, and I've read about this and I've also seen videos on this. So it is like a mindset. It is a thought. Some religious people find it as a bit of a hypocrisy to promote belief in a fictional person is fake, as well as God, which you believe is real. regardless of if he is or I won't get into that.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
But you start out by saying for people who have that faith.
Yeah. For people who, so it's like, on my notes I have, no, this is bad explained. Do it better during the podcast. But basically, because the idea is you're going to be asking your kid, if you're in a religious household or whatever, you're going to be asking your kid to, believe in a lot of things that aren't immediately right in front of you. God, afterlife, metaphysical, spiritual stuff, which is awesome. But if you include Santa in that mix and say, well, actually now it's not real, then it's like, well, what the heck? Well,
so are you going to tell me one day that the other ones are real?
Yeah. Like that's
and what about the tooth fairy?
Yeah, that's a trust issue right there.
And what about the Easter Bunny?
Yeah. That like, yeah, exactly. Like some, I've even seen like there's like a pastor I was watching a video about talking about how like, I just didn't, we decided, like I had talked with my wife, we decided not to have Santa in our house, not because we were like against the idea or whatever, just because we were worried about like the trust issue that might come from
so
it.
Interesting. It's funny because we all somehow we managed to grow up just fine.
Yeah.
But when you're faced with that decision of, for the most part, when you're faced with that decision about Santa, it suddenly becomes a very complex, like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do?
Yeah. I chose this topic. One, because it's topical. It's the holidays. I thought
good timing.
Do a holiday. Well, why not? Santa's a fun person, jolly fellow. I'm sure he won't mind.
And everybody knows who Santa is.
Yeah. Hopefully, if you don't, this is going to be very confusing for you.
I was wondering if we should have put a disclaimer at the front of this. Not that any children would be listening to our podcast, but just like spoiler alert. Santa is actually a fictional guy.
Yeah. Your parents are lying to you. No.
I know that some people who have gotten sort of frustrated with the materialistic part of it, but want to, celebrate the time of year because it is an important time of year. They will, not even exchange gifts or just exchange very minimal gifts, but they'll go away together, or they'll like leave home during the holidays, during Christmas, so that they can just spend, sort of isolate themselves and spend time just with their families and connecting that way. So I always thought that was kind of a cool thing because it's easy to get really caught up in all the gifts and all the wrapping and all the everything. Yeah, the Christmas parties, and it can take away and become a very stressful time of year.
Oh yeah.
So people deal with it differently, I guess.
But yeah, I chose this because I thought it fit. It was interesting and informal. I learned some stuff. I hope you learned some stuff.
I did learn some things. Yeah.
Oh, this was interesting.
Yeah, it was real good, Jacob. I liked it. I liked it for all the reasons that you listed.
Awesome.
So this has been episode 11. What is episode 12 going to bring us?
Episode 12. Now, normally I don't talk about politics on this because it's a hot button issue, but this is okay because it's old politics.
Okay.
Like everyone involved is dead, so no one cares. I want to talk about the craziest president America has ever had.
Oh.
And yes, I'm talking about Andrew Jackson.
Very interesting. Okay. So are we going to be talking about him, the person, or his presidency, or the whole ball of wax?
The whole ball of wax, but not in like a 25 novel form, and like more of a simplified, relaxed form.
Yeah.
But I want to kind of talk about who he was as a person and his presidency, and we'll get into it. I don't want to get too much into it now,
that sounds excellent. Very good. Well, I look forward to hearing about that in the next episode.
It's interesting. Let me tell you all that. It was an odd bird.
Very cool. Okay, well, listeners, thanks so much for listening. We appreciate you. We hope that you found some enjoyment. We hope that you're enjoying the holiday season, if in fact you're listening to this during the month of December. And if you like us, if you're entertained, please share with your friends. We'll see you next time.
Bye.